People have speculated from season 1 that it was, the island was supposed to be purgatory and whatnot. And I think that actually probably was the correct answer.
I think so too.
And then the writers and the studio got scared because they're like, well, if they already know the answer, and it became much more popular than they ever expected, and they wanted to drag it out longer. So they're like, uh-oh, we better change the story. And so they did change the story. And now, being the final season, they kind of wanted to go back to it. And therefore, that's why they created this Flash Sideways.
I think so too. I think they wanted to tell the story that they wanted to tell. And the story basically was this. What if these people died in a plane crash and a select amount of them still were not reconciled enough with their lives? Because they did each come with these issues, and they have this time here to reconcile those issues, find redemption, find acceptance, and let go and move on. That's basically the story they told with Lost. So they succeeded. It's just that they had to find a slightly different way to do it. And yeah, fine, it left some holes. But overall, they started with an intent and they finished with that intent. And I think they did it pretty well.
Yeah. But let's be clear, that did not happen on the show.
No, it wasn't purgatory.
It wasn't purgatory. They were not dead from the plane crash. That might have been the initial thought that they were going to do that. But in the end, that's not what happened.
Here's what did bother me. Hurley becoming the leader. I'm sorry. I like Hurley. I like all the characters, but I don't believe for a second that guy should have been in a leadership position. And the reason that it was Jack is because it should have been Jack. He was the obvious choice because he was the right choice. And if he had to die, which is fine too, if he had to die, then Kate or Sawyer would have been better than Hurley. Like, I just don't believe it. And then Ben's going to be a second? Oh, come on. That guy is way too power. That's like putting a heroin addict in a room full of heroin. Like, he's way too power hungry to be able to handle that.
Yeah, and quite honestly, Hurley doesn't really have the brain power to not be out-manipulated by Ben,
Yeah. I mean, ultimately I let it go, whatever, but it did bother me.
Shannon and Saeed, that was one of the things in the Flash Sideways that did bother me. Just because I don't feel like they gave much depth to that story or that romantic relationship. We haven't even heard of him talking about Shannon in the last how many seasons. It was all about Nadia for a while, and now it's back to Shannon. So that part just, I think the Boone and Shannon character within the context of the Flash Sideways was not necessary. So there was a lot of people that are upset. I'm not so much upset about this, but I do know where they're coming from because it is something that a lot of people invested their emotions into. Was the whole story of season 5 was the incident and the nuke going off, and it basically was a red herring. They did it, and we thought, okay, the timelines diverged. That's how we got this Flash Sideways. So,
when does it start?
Yeah.
When does it not?
And it ended up
Did it reset time?
Yes, and it ended up being
nothing.
All
right, here's what I think about the incident. As a creator of Lost, they decided that it was going to be about Jack's death, or all of their deaths. They just decided that, and then they said, okay, how are we going to do that? We're going to create this other world that will exist as kind of the purgatory or the holding place that the island would have been in season 1. All right, how are we going to introduce that storyline? We have to find a reason that we're showing this alternate timeline. All right, and then they come up with the incident. So it's a little bit of a trick on their part. I don't think it's a great thing. I understand why they would have done it. To me, better is just start the season and show it. Don't tell us why. So that we're going to be like, what the hell is going on?
Just be confused about it.
Until ultimately you reveal, you know what I mean? That's what it was.
I think as an audience, like a viewer, I think you could have just kind of guessed that it was the alternate timeline. Lead it off with that whole plane not crashing.
Not crashing. And that tells you everything you need to know. Yeah. That was a little bit tricky on their part. I agree. Not fair. We might have guessed what it was if we didn't have the inciting incident to keep thinking that that's what it was. That's one thing, and I think it really would have been ballsier at that point to just say, let's just make it Jack's death.
Yes.
Now, they didn't want to do that to the other characters, I'm sure, and so they had to manipulate it in all these different ways, but ballsier and more appropriate to say, you know what, this has been Jack's, let's face it, it's been Jack and Locke's story, but if we really just need to pick someone to focus on, let's just make it his death.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Jack's story. I mean, he's always been the leader. He's always been the main focus. It's always been about his problems, his relationships between him and Locke, him and Kate, him and Sawyer, you know? And so focusing on him for the Flash Sideways, I think would have been great. Okay, so now that the series has ended, obviously there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. We're not going to go into the little nitpicky ones, but personally, there's a few that we each kind of want to get covered. I think they should have explained the whole how people could not have babies on the island after the incident. It's something they always talked about and they showed, but they really didn't give a resolution.
The cabin and the occupants of the cabin. Now, if you're going to get into Jacob and the Man in Black, that to the level that we got into it in this season, really nothing about that cabin, really nothing about the nothing about the idea that actually Jacob was trapped all this time, or maybe he wasn't, or who's speaking. Nothing.
Yeah, they even had like a shadowy face for a split second inside that in Jacob's cabin, you know, which they never revealed to be anything.
Yeah, that's an unanswered question that does kind of bother me. Yeah.
Another one, I think, the sickness, the infection.
What's the infection?
Yes, they talk about that, you know, with Rousseau and her crewmates. Yeah. She says they got infected. And then we kind of see that later on with Claire and Saeed.
Right.
They never really explain what exactly it is and how it happens.
They don't. I mean, they indicate that Smokey is responsible, but we don't see how. Now, with Saeed, we assume that he brings him back to life, and as he does, he sort of infuses him with his own energy and life force. Okay, fine, but what happened with Claire? What happened with the whole crew of hers, this French crew? The only people, like, that the whole crew got this sickness all of a sudden. It's like it became Event Horizon for them, and then never again, except for these two other people. I mean, in all of the time that the smoke monster was on the island, that's what he infected: the French, a blonde, and an Iraqi, and that's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, originally in season 2, I had thought that that's what the others were trying to keep the people from Oceanic 815 from. I thought that played into why they were grabbing certain people and wanting certain people, and maybe to check if they were infected or not, or something like that.
There's some things that people get upset about, you know, that to me, I'm like, this is silliness. Like, there's like, it's a TV show and it has logistical issues that it has to address, and it can do nothing about, you know? Like, people are like, well, what happened with Walt? Here's what happened with Walt. His parents pulled him out of the show after the first season. That's what happened. You know, it's not like a failing on their part. There was nothing they could do about it. They had to just let that whole storyline go. They didn't have him anymore, you know?
Yeah, and he was growing too big.
Yeah.
He's growing up for the timeline that Lost was trying to do, which was only 3 years.
Only 3 years, and he had grown 6 years. So it just didn't work anymore. I'm sure they had a plan for him originally, but they had a whole different plan originally, and it just didn't matter anymore. So to me, Walt, irrelevant. I don't even want to see Walt and Michael. I mean, like, thank you.
Yes.
That I didn't.
I was actually glad that they had left the show. I was sick of hearing Michael scream Walt every 5 seconds. So. Yeah. That's the end of the series. Overall, I really enjoyed the series. Season 6 was not my favorite season, but it ended in a satisfying conclusion for me. Obviously, there's more questions. Obviously, certain things that happened I didn't care for, but overall, I think it was a satisfactory conclusion to a series that really had some really great moments, great characters.
Yeah, I agree. I think that as a series, when Lost was great, it was fantastic. You know, extremely well written, very cinematically shot, well acted, and characters that kept working for me throughout the seasons for the most part. It had some ups and downs, and that's a little bit to be expected, and I felt very, very satisfied with the end result.
All right, guys, so that's what we thought of the Lost finale. You can post your comments below on the website.
Or on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to the Think Hero YouTube account.
or you can follow us on Twitter. Mine is @ThinkHero.
Mine is @JRossC, and make sure to go ahead and @reply us so that we know to follow you back and we can chat with you.
All right, see you guys later.